we think that technology affords us the opportunity to multitask, and that could not be further from the truth.
What's the most efficient path to victory against this particular opponent?
He's dropping off for the choke here. We could see the finish. It's looking tight. Tight as Alpra.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kwan. The Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. Today, I have a guest with me, Mr. Scott Lynch from the Motivated Mind podcast. Scott, welcome to the show.
Matt, appreciate you having me, buddy.
Yeah, so I was looking to research an episode on the flow state. In Jiu Jitsu, we use the term flowing to describe light training with a partner where we can sort of focus on skills rather than trying to murder each other. And it's a common term used in jiu-jitsu, but also other skills. I think a lot of us have experienced flow state in a lot of different skills that we're associated with. And I really wanted to pick your brain about this because I discovered your podcast researching the flow state. And before we talk about the flow state, please, why don't you tell us who you are, Scott?
I appreciate it, Matt. Thanks for the intro there. So I have been in podcasting since 2018. So I feel like a dinosaur in the industry, considering podcasting isn't that old. But I started the podcast in October of 2018 with a very specific mission. But before getting to that mission, I'll give you kind of the background and the context as to what got me into podcasting and really focusing on this mission. So in 2015, shortly after Christmas, I received a text from a really good friend that my best friend had been shot. And of course, receiving a text like that, your head goes in 1,000 different places. Your emotions are all over the place, and you immediately think worst case scenario. And 5 or 10 minutes had gone by, which felt like eternity. And I thought, okay, he's an avid outdoorsman. Maybe there was an accidental discharge. He shot himself in the leg or arm, hunting or something like that. And unfortunately, when my friend had responded, he had said, Tim's taken his own life. And immediately, that floodgate opened even wider, and I went to 1,000 different dark places. And for 2.5 years, I spent a lot of time trying to understand what that moment meant to me and how I could take something so dark and find light in the crevices of that dark time. And so I spent a lot of time going into therapy, just understanding myself, because something that happened shortly after that situation was that I had a victim mentality, blaming myself for the situation. Why was I not there more? How did I not see his pain? Why didn't I help more? All of these negative beliefs and self-talk that really anchored me into a dark place. And what I finally realized was that I wanted to help other people navigate through darkness and actually elevate in their life to see their potential, their value, find their purpose, and find their why, and have a reason to live, to fight, and focus on that mission every day. And so that was really the start of the impetus behind the podcast, which has developed now into a newsletter, courses, coaching, you name it. And that has been the focus and mission every day, and the drive and the fuel that keeps the momentum going for me mentally and also physically through my endeavors.
Wow, incredible. I had no idea that's how you started your podcast journey. Thank you for sharing that with us. When you say victim mindset, that didn't really sound like, or a victim mentality. Is a victim mentality more so like you think bad things are happening to you and you are the victim, and your mindset is that negative things are just always being projected upon to you? Because it sounded to me like you were describing you wanted to help people, you wish you could have done more. Am I mistaken here? Are those two different things?
I don't think they're necessarily exclusive, right? So in the moment, there is, again, a wealth of emotions that you're having to strip away, right? Like fabric that you're unwinding. There is a piece, or there was a piece, where I said, how could this happen to me? Why is this happening to me? But
Mhm.
there's an extension of that victim mentality, which was, why didn't I do more? How come I, am experiencing this? And at the end of the day, it wasn't about me, right? I was experiencing this extension of what happened, unfortunately, to my friend. But at the end of the day, I could not control that happening to him. So the victim aspect was, do I want to live in a world where I'm full of regret and trying to pull back the past? Or do I
Mhm.
want to move forward and take what has happened and figure out how to leverage it, like this
Yeah.
fulcrum in life, and actually make something positive come out of this? And then reciprocate that or echo that through the rest of the world, through my network and the people that I know or the people that I want to affect.
Would you describe that second piece as almost like what some people they use the term survivor's guilt?
Sure, sure. Um, in a sense, um, in a sense, I I think for me though, more specifically, again, all of these different stages. Stage one was probably more of that, right? Feeling guilty that I did not see the pain, feeling
Mhm.
guilty that
Mhm. You
I
wish
did
you could
not
have done
spend.
more.
Exactly. But then I think the second stage was, why did this happen to me? Right? Why am I part of this? Which I think was very selfish, of course, in the moment. Right. So I think it's not, our brains think very binary, right? It's very black and white. It's this or that. If I have that, I can't have this. I don't think the trajectory of that experience for me was just one thing, right? It was a multitude of things in these gates that I had to unlock. The final gate though was figuring out how I could leverage the moment, right? How I could leverage something so dark. And for me, that came down to mindset, and that came down to perspective, something that
Mhm.
many of us have a piss poor perspective in life. And that was the kind of final gate that I came through, was how could I become a mindset engineer and help other people to engineer their mindset and their perspective to actually see the value in themselves and to actually focus on the things that they can't control, rather than
Mhm.
where 98% of our species focuses on are the things that we can't control, which then we don't move, we do not progress, we do not grow. And that's really where I help people and I specialize in.
I think that that's fantastic. Like you had mentioned modestly that you thought that this was kind of a selfish thing for you to try to find something positive out of the passing of your friend, um such a horrible thing to happen to you, and saying that it was selfish for you to think about, well, how could this be positive for me, or how could I find light in this? But that kind of mindset is so important in this world, and especially, again, I'm not trying to compare like um my experiences with jujitsu with the passing of your friend, but like in jujitsu, if you lose a tournament, like again, the highs are highs and the lows are lows, and
Mm,
you often wonder like, okay, why am I doing this? Why did I lose? You could dwell on the loss, you can make excuses for yourself, you see this constantly. Or you could say, okay, what can I control? Where is the positive in this loss? Where was the hole in my game that led to my loss? And then if you have that kind of a mindset that carries you forward into improvement, you can fix those holes, right? Another example,
right.
even more for me, more emotionally charged, is injuries, right? Because when an athlete
Mm,
gets injured and you can't do what you want to do, it's like you can't work, you can't
mhm,
express yourself, you can't compete. and it's a nightmare. You're on the shelf, right? You're thinking of lots of mental thoughts. Am I going to come back strong enough? Is the injury ever going to heal? Are my opponents training when I can't train? And it's easy to go into these dark places, right? Where me and my buddies, we were constantly getting injured in jiu-jitsu, and they call it the dark place. When they get injured, they're like, yeah, I'm in the dark place tonight. It's like, oh, I know you need a friend right now because you know that you can't train right now. And, you know, resorting to things like food and, you know, substances and things like this, and Netflix and video games. It's easy to sort of spiral when really you could look at an injury and say, okay, like, I've been through so many injuries in my career now that I just say, okay, let's switch gears. Yes, you're injured. Yes, you're going to be off for, you know, it could be months and months. What can you do? Like,
Right.
can you study in this time? I have a martial arts school. So usually at that point, when I get injured, it's like, okay, now I can switch gears and become a better coach now because I can be there for my students. So I too am constantly looking to leverage from bad situations. And I find that having that mindset it'll just make you more resilient in general when, you know, when tough times come your way.
Yeah. Well, I think there's that beautifully said. I think there's another or a layer down that is important to understand, because it's easy to say those things and it's way more challenging to put it in action. And I think a great way to put a lot of things into action is to understand the value or the drawback to an action or not taking an action. So, for example, our minds can only focus on one thing at a time, right? So, if I told you, I'd love you to pay attention to what I'm saying and respond to what I'm saying, but at the same time, I said, I want you to describe or think about a polar bear, right? How thick its fur is, its color, its aggression, its dominance. You would not be able to do both. It's literally physically impossible. And so when you understand the direction of energy and thinking, when you are in a situation where, for your example, you get injured and all you're thinking about is the injury and not being able to get back to jiu-jitsu, then you're taking away energy and thought and dedication to actually healing, to actually getting better. You're retracting from the thing that you ultimately want to do. And so that's why I think it is so powerful that we are thoughtful about where we dedicate our energy and our attention. Because once we pivot off of to one thing, that's the thing that we're committing to. It's a great example would be sleeping, right? If you're trying to go to sleep and you're thinking about all the things that you have to do tomorrow, guess what's not going to happen? You're not going to go to sleep, right? So I think it's really important to understand, if I dedicate mentally a yes to this thing, then I'm mentally dedicating a no to this other thing, right? Everything I say yes to in the physical world means I'm saying no to other things. It's the same dichotomy, if you will, with our mind and where we're directing our energy. And I think when you understand the balance and how that operates, you're a lot more intentional about where you're going to spend and commit your time and what you want to focus on, as opposed to detracting away from the thing that you ultimately want, with, in this example, would be getting better, right? Getting back to jiu-jitsu.
So we're about 10 minutes in. We haven't even really talked about flow state. It's kind of, this conversation has gone in some interesting directions, but things you're talking about directly correlate with entering flow state. So you just talked about how directing your attention to a specific thing, right? And that's really what I'd like. In a moment, I'd like you to describe or define flow state for us.
Sure.
But that kind of, to me, is what flow state is. Like, it's kind of like you're doing some kind of an activity or skill or whatever, and you are completely immersed in it. You're with undivided attention. And it's funny. It's almost like I sometimes, so I study a lot of jiu-jitsu instructionals. That's where I get a lot of my, where I get a lot of new content from to teach and to work on and whatnot. And I've tried to do other things just to see if my brain can handle it. Can I get into a DVD and watch it and try to learn new moves while I am listening to a podcast or you know, like watching something else like a jiu-jitsu match? And it's impossible. Your brain is just like, it's completely in two different directions, right? And what happens basically is you end up not doing anything well. It's almost like a waste of time in the end, because you can't really tap into that flow state. I think students who are in post-secondary education or adult education, they can reach a flow state when it comes to studying, but they really got to like get their mind into that flow state. So before we talk about flow state, like how we can easily get into it, or what it really like what are some mechanisms we can use to reach flow state? Can you describe in your own words, what is the flow state?
It is a mental state where we are completely focused, and this is an important piece, on a single task or activity, where we're completely engaged in what we're doing. And this is the second most important piece. And it almost comes with ease without even trying. We lose track of time. That is getting into the flow state. So by definition, you cannot multitask. You cannot be in the flow state and multitask. And I think that's where a lot of us go wrong, is we think that technology affords us the opportunity to multitask. And that could not be further from the truth.
So it's kind of like where the mind and the body just kind of work together almost without thinking. Like it's obviously there's thinking going on, but it's like, it's almost like a subconscious expression of whatever you're doing. And you say you can't multitask, but sometimes, like in jiu-jitsu, we are kind of multitasking in the various things we're doing, but it's one task. It's like, it's one activity. We are fully immersed in that one activity with like undivided attention. And quite often in the flow state, would you disagree that the performer enjoys what they're doing, or do they need to enjoy what they're doing to reach flow state?
Yes, 100%. And I think that's understanding dopamine reward, right? Which is what we all seek all the time. So I think one of the issues and the direction that we're going here is that in order to understand how we get into flow state, we need to understand dopamine and why we seek it, right? Most of us, because of the environment that we're in and the way that we're built, seek dopamine hits every single day. What would be an example of a dopamine hit? A notification on your phone or on your watch, right? A notification on social media, a text message, a phone call, entertainment. We're constantly seeking it. And we're constantly seeking it because we now live in a world where we've been programmed to seek it. And now here's where the issue lies when it comes to getting into flow state. We distract ourselves with very high dopamine rewards. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you are studying a new move as it relates to jiu-jitsu, and you get bored for whatever reason 5 minutes into the video or the podcast that you're listening to. So what you do is you reach for your phone and you start doom scrolling Instagram or TikTok. The dopamine reward is higher with that behavior than the thing that you're doing. So the chances that your brain is going to break from the high dopamine reward to go back to the training video is substantially low. And I think that is a mistake that a lot of us make, is that we take quote unquote breaks, and the breaks are a higher dopamine reward than the thing that we're engaging in. So then the $1 million question comes, well, how the hell do we get around it? The idea, or the thing that I've implemented in my life, is I try to work in 52-minute periods. It's proven to be the time that our brain can actually focus. And I take 15 to 17-minute breaks every 52 minutes. And the breaks that I take, those 15 to 17 minutes, and this is all science. I'm not making up these time frames. I make sure that I'm engaging in boring things, whether that be just staring at a wall, staring at a floor, or just sitting there in silence. I don't reach for my phone. I don't play around with my Garmin watch. I don't do any of those things. I want to ensure that the reward is higher for going back to the task than the break that I'm taking and overstimulating myself in the break. Because then your brain and your body does not want to return to that thing because it's less rewarding. So then it makes logical sense. Bore yourself in those moments, those 15 to 17 minutes. And the other thing that's a plus with this is you create white space. So creativity, epiphanies pop up during those breaks. When we're constantly overstimulating ourselves, how the hell do we actually listen to our inner voice, our inner needs, or actually gain clarity? It's nearly impossible. So I think that's one of the biggest pieces around actually getting into flow state is understanding that balance of dopamine. And the last part here is that our body, and this happens with addicts, whether it be addicted to alcohol or drugs, you need larger hits every time. So once you get into that place of seeking those high dopamine rewards, you constantly need to fulfill or up the ante with your high, which means you spend more time on social media, which means you spend more time finding that stimulation, which means it becomes harder to break away and actually get into a flow state.
I'd love to do an episode on dopamine and dopamine rewards. It is something that is, it's one of the most unspoken about addictions that we all have, just especially today with phones, with social media, just mass communication. There's so much dopamine. Everyone wants it and nobody really thinks about it. So it influences our behaviors and our addictions without us even really knowing why. And when you're talking about, like, it sounds to me like you're trying to make yourself, I don't know if bored is the way that I would describe it, but just so that, like, you're not bombarded with dopamine. It's almost like I've listened to a couple of podcasts on resetting their dopamine, right? Like taking like a 30 days of
detox,
no phones, no drugs, no alcohol, whatever, even no orgasms and things like this, right? And just to reset dopamine. It's almost like when you're addicted to a substance or an activity, it's like you are constantly eating a bag of Skittles. And then, you try to eat an apple after that. And it tastes bland. It tastes nothing. Your brain is already so, like, the dopamine bandwidth is already exhausted. And you need, but luckily, from what I can see through my research, it is easy. Well, I'm not going to say easy to reset, but it's simple to reset. It's possible for you to reset your dopamine reward system inside your brain, but it takes like a period of dopamine abstinence. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yes. Yeah. I think of it like a detox, right? Where you're refraining from having any of those things for a certain period of time. And you can do it in small stints, if you will, and bursts like I just described. This is actually why. So if you want to feel fulfilled every day or accomplished every day, and this links to flow state and dopamine too as well, your brain is most receptive in the morning. And what do most people do in the morning? They scroll social media. The first thing they do when they wake up is they check their email or they check social media. It's the worst thing that you can do. The best thing that you can actually do is do the most difficult tasks first thing in the morning, as opposed to the high dopamine hit things in the morning, because then it's a cascading scale down from there. So if you wake up and you're like, hey, I have 6 different things that I need to do today, but the first thing that you do almost subconsciously is you grab your phone and you start scrolling on social media. Well, again, now your dopamine just went through the roof, and the chances that your brain is going to be willing to switch gears and go do those higher things, those harder things, is going to drop substantially, because of the reward balance, right? But if you wake up and you decide, you go through your routine for the day, let's say you work out, etc., you do those hard things, one, you're going to feel a lot more accomplished, but two, you're not going to have this major drag and resistance for the rest of the day because you did not overload your dopamine first thing in the morning, which when I think about flow state, I think that is a key aspect of getting into flow state, is not overdoing or zapping your dopamine first thing in the morning and then expecting that you're going to get into a deep flow state. You're out of your mind if you think that's the way it's going to work.
And you mentioned like the reward that we can get through doing something we enjoy. And we're not, so in terms of jiu-jitsu, it's not necessarily the reward is not a medal or an accomplishment. Like, yes, that is a reward for sure. That's a long-term reward, but really I think when it comes to flow state, like you're not going to get into a flow state training for a competition. In fact, competition training is quite aggressive. Often it's stressful intentionally to mimic the environment of competition. Quite often you're put in bad situations or situations where your opponent is trying to stall. They're trying to shut you down and just frustrate you. So you're dealing with the stress levels that competition would have. It's far from flow state. But the reward of doing jiu-jitsu is the enjoyment of it. It's actually like, I think if an athlete enjoys the sport, they're doing it, and they're doing it just for the sole purpose of enjoyment, that is where, for me, that is kind of the best environment to enter flow state. And one thing you had mentioned on your podcast right away, I had like a light bulb moment. I was like, man, that makes so much sense when we're talking about flow state, is there has to be a balance between the skill of the performer and the difficulty of the activity. If the skill of the performer is too low, they can't reach flow state. If the difficulty of the activity is too low, then it's same thing. You can't reach flow state. Both of them lead to like complacency, essentially. Like you can't really tap in. But when there's that balance of difficulty and skill, that is where you will see that you can enter the flow state. And quite often, like when I enter the flow state, I don't even realize I'm there. It's like it's almost like time doesn't exist. You could be doing jiu-jitsu and flowing, and then you look up, you're like, holy shit, we've been here an hour. Like like where did that time go?
Yeah, I think what you're describing there is the Goldilocks rule, right? That balance is really important. So if you're a tennis player and you decide to, and you've been playing tennis for a few years and you decide to go up against a 6-year-old, it's going to be pretty boring and the reward isn't going to be as enjoyable. If you also go up against, I don't know, the best tennis player in the world, it's going to be pretty defeating. But if you go up against someone that has matched skills as you, well, then it's going to be fun to try to beat that person, right? To level up your game, to work on your form, right? To focus on those smaller aspects. And I think that's that balance that you're talking about, enjoying the actual process. And I think there's a bigger kind of idea here where it's that as humans, we have this innate need to rush to things, right? Rush to the finish of things, right? Once I get this thing, then I will be happy. Once I get this thing, then I will be fulfilled. But the irony in seeking out being in the end zone, if you will, or standing there, is that a majority of your life is actually spent in the journey, not at the end piece. And so ironically, by forcing all of that journey and that process and not actually being fully immersed and present in that process, well, then you're wasting 3/4 of your life, of your training. And to me, that seems like a crazy way to live, right? And actually enjoy the process. So one of the things that I've done, and this can transcend multiple aspects of your life, is I've gamified the hell out of everything. I think one of the best ways that you can actually get into flow state, or you can actually enjoy the process, is by gamifying things and timing things. So I will challenge myself to do different things all the time. So for example, in February, I decided I wanted to see if I could do 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups for 100 days and not miss a day. And I've timed every single one. I have an Excel spreadsheet. I put it online so people could see it to hold me accountable. And I always try to beat out my times. And doesn't always work out, obviously, because you're never going to get down to zero, but I get to enjoy the process of my form, my function, and getting in that mental state. And that gamification piece, I think, is something that a lot of us could use. And it actually comes, you mentioned, Matt, at the beginning of the interview, video games. The reason video games are so addictive is because they have what's called an instant feedback loop. So if you're in a race car game and you bump into a wall, you immediately understand, oh, I shouldn't bump into the wall anymore, right? That's that instant feedback loop. So then the question becomes, how can you design your life where you gamify different aspects of it? And I think using something as simple as a timer on your phone or on your watch is a great way to be solely zoned in and focused on that thing. So when I go in and I'm doing 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, I'm just focusing on my breathing, controlling myself, and focusing on the task at hand, nothing else. All life worries and chaos kind of bleeds, and it goes back to you losing track of time ultimately.
And you had mentioned how like the reward itself, the end goal, like that it's more about the journey, the process of getting there. It almost kind of reminds me of an analogy, like you're kind of, when you're a kid, you're waiting for Christmas, you know, and you're like, oh, Christmas will come soon. It's December 1st. And you're like, oh, you're waiting for Christmas. And that's kind of the fun part, is the countdown and the excitement and the anticipation of Christmas. And then Christmas morning comes and it's over in like 20 minutes. And you're like, oh, like all that dopamine, all the unwrapping of gifts, all the new shit I got, you know, and then it's like, what now? Now, and then you kind of feel depleted after, and, you know, obviously you enjoy the holidays with your families, but it's kind of like, it's almost anticlimactic in a way once you finally reach that. And in jiu-jitsu, I've experienced that the same way. Like major milestones in a lot of people's journeys would be like getting their black belt, right? Like they really look forward to that black belt. And I think too many students prioritize the status of having a black belt. But once you get your black belt, it's like, you realize how much you don't know. You realize how good all the other black belts are, and how you're just a white belt to them. Or it could be like, oh, I want to win a tournament, right? And you're just, for months, you're thinking about that tournament, training for the tournament, and then you finally win and it's great. And it's like, oh, what now? Like, do I dwell on this victory? Like, it's good to celebrate a victory, but you should just move on and think about what's next. So that, like, I always tell people that the promotions in jiu-jitsu and the results that, you know, from tournaments and whatnot, like that's not really the reward. At the end of the day, the reward is like enjoying what you do, right? Being able to come in and perceive your own improvement and kind of build relationships along the way, and all the things that nobody really thinks about when they sign up for jiu-jitsu, rather than like, one day I'm going to get this accolade or this recognition. So yeah, I think finding that enjoyment is crucial, you know, to reach the flow state. I've never reached flow state in something that I would say I truly wholeheartedly didn't enjoy. So clearly pleasure is like a big part of the flow state. Can I ask you, what do you think, like what are some good tools or ways to enter flow state? Like I've heard the word triggers being used, like being able to set up a trigger to enter the flow state. Is that a possibility? How would you recommend people enter the flow state?
Well, I think it's less tools. I think when we think about achieving things, we think about adding things. But as James Clear said, the author of Atomic Habits, it is more about subtraction, not about addition. So I think that tools can be effective, i.e. a timer can be a simple thing. We just talked about, you know, an example where I could beat out my previous time. But another use to that is if you're sitting down, remember I said that I will do work for 52 minutes. I set a timer on my watch. And so once I set that timer, I know that I have 52 minutes to do that thing that I need to do. And there was already an intention behind it. So I think that can be a good addition or tool for people to get in a flow state, because you're gamifying that process by saying, well, I only have 52 minutes. If you know that you're constrained by time, chances are that your brain's going to focus on that thing. When you have an endless amount of time to actually do something, you're going to use all that time. You're going to fill that entire time just to do that thing. So if you give yourself 3 hours, you're going to take 3 hours to do that thing. But if you give yourself an hour, I'm going to guarantee that you could probably shave the 3 hours down to an hour. So I think a timer can be a great tool, but I think it's more about less tools and more about subtraction. So just getting rid of distractions. Have one tab open on your computer. So to your point, when you were watching the training videos, shut your phone off, put it in a different damn room because you know you're going to reach for it. So the point is, pull things from your environment that you know you're going to fall victim to or become distracted by, and shut off notifications. So I know your podcast is about Jiu Jitsu, but obviously a lot of training, let's say you're reading a book or you're watching a video. Well, if the intention is just to understand or learn something new about Jiu Jitsu, then why does all the other stuff matter? Why does your phone matter at that point? Why does notifications on your computer matter? None of it matters. So I think it's less about addition, aside from small things like maybe timing yourself to get into a flow state, but it's also more so about removing the distractions from your environment. And that really comes down to building your environment. So even in my studio right here, I have 2 photos on the wall, and they equal 6 words and nothing else. I have one small window, so it's not distracting. I put in noise canceling headphones when I'm working, so sounds don't distract me and pull my attention. So I think about this as kind of, you ever seen a Clydesdale horse when they're walking and they're pulling a big cart behind them? They have these peripheral things on the side of their head so
Blinders.
they don't get distracted. Exactly. And so I think about that all the time when I'm focusing. Like right now, where's my attention bleeding to? And whatever the answer is there, I remove it from my environment. It's pretty simple. And I think that most of us kind of lean into complexity bias, where we think a simple answer is not the best answer. That couldn't be the case because then I would be doing it. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, it is as simple as that.
Where do these time frames come from? You had mentioned scientifically 52 minutes is kind of the ideal time to be trying to accomplish something, or whatever given activity. Where does that time come from?
So there were a couple, I don't know the name of the study offhand, but it was checking brainwaves with people and understanding their capacity to keep at a high level of performance, and that it substantially dropped off after 52 minutes and they lost concentration. So anything beyond there, what was happening when they looked at the brain was that the brain was exerting more energy to stay focused after 52 minutes than before. So the way that I like an analogy here is your MPG, your miles per gallon, drops substantially after 52 minutes. So if that's the case, and we go back to focusing on the things that we can control, if that's the way our brains are wired, why are we trying to fight it? Because then we're exerting more energy for less of a return. So to me, I just play into the biology of our bodies, right? Why try to fight these things if that's naturally the direction we're going? And again, there's a lot more fulfillment when you understand your body's capacity and its limitations and you lean into that. And it's not to say that we can't break limitations, but I think it's just being thoughtful about where we're dedicating our energy and the ROI of that energy dedication to a specific area.
And you had mentioned, you like to, whenever you're getting your work done, you like to have noise canceling headphones.
Yeah.
But I'd like to ask you, how does music relate to entering the flow state? Because there are times when I will need to write articles for the podcast or for my online academy or whatever. I like to write sometimes. And I've tried to write while listening to podcasts, and there's no way. Because it's just like word salad jumbling around in your head. But if I put on music, and from what I've heard, like calming classical music is actually ideal. But if I put on like I'm a huge fan of Tool, right? And Tool's very heavy, but they also have like a lot of different ambient style songs that are quite beautifully orchestrated. And I find sometimes if I put something like that on in the background, not too loud, but just in the background, for me, I feel like it can help me enter a state where I am free of distractions, even though I'm listening to music. So how does
It's a great
music
question.
play into flow state?
So it's a great question. So when I say I put in noise canceling headphones, I'm not listening to music anytime that I'm working. So I'll give you some context here. So I drop 2 episodes every single week, Monday and Thursday, and I write between 8 to 12 pages for a script for each of those episodes. It's heavy research. It's scouring the edges of the internet for this data that I'm talking about here today. I never listen to music, and I have a wide variety of music. I will listen to classical, to rap and hip hop. I mean, you name it, and everything in between, and rock, so on and so forth. But when it comes to work, I never listen to those things. I actually use a platform, and I don't know the price, and no, I don't have any affiliate deal with them, called Brain.fm. And so these guys have specifically engineered white noise, if you will, dependent on the state that you're trying to get into. So if you're trying to get into a relaxing state, they have a specifically scientifically curated noises to get you into a focus state, or to break anxiety, or to get into relaxation. And it's phenomenal. It is phenomenal, almost to the point where sometimes I almost forget to blink because it's so good at getting you into a flow state and focusing.
What kind of are we talking about, nature inspired noises, or are they like, because when you say white noise, I think of like when my kids were babies and there's literally like that static sound when the TV would turn
Yep.
black and white. It was just like, but
So
but I don't find that relaxing. What kind of noises does this program have?
So it all depends the state that you're trying to get into. So when it's in focus state, it will have very like classical. Sometimes it goes on shuffle, right? So you can pick the type if you want it instrumental, if you want it nature, etc. And within that category, there's specific curation for focus, for anxiety, for stress, etc., etc. So sometimes it can be classical music, and in the background will be like trickling rain, or like a slow waterfall or a river. Another one, it could be raindrops hitting leaves in the woods and birds chirping really light. It just completely depends the category that you've picked. I would say from my experience, I enjoy more of the nature noises. So we live in a beautiful piece of property here, 6 acres, that if it's not Brain FM, I'm working outside where I can just hear the birds chirping, the wind smacking, branches up against other branches, and a cool breeze coming through. It's a great way to just kind of feel at peace and present, right? And locked into what you're doing. But Brain FM is a phenomenal program. So again, I don't listen to any music, but it varies. It completely depends the category that you want to get into. But most of the time, the channel that I'm on is purely focus. 52 minutes. I pause. It can be instrumental, natural noises, 15 to 17-minute break, come back, play. And it's like clockwork.
So do you think that, like, depending on the activity and the individual, different types of sounds could help you dial into flow state? Like, for example, I used to listen to tons of hip hop back in my high school days. I don't listen to it as much anymore, but I'm not going to lie, everyone seems to want to do Jiu Jitsu to hip hop. Like that's what they
Interesting.
ask for at the gym. So I put on hip
Yeah.
hop, right? And
Yeah.
it is good to roll with, right? Like, I'm not going to
Yeah.
lie. But other things, I probably would never put hip hop on if I was trying to write articles, or, I don't know, study for a podcast or anything like that. So what determines the types of sounds or music that you should listen to when it comes to dialing in, getting into flow state?
So another great question. I think it's completely predicated on the individual, and I don't think it's a one size that fits all. So to that point, when I'm in deep work, when I'm talking about deep work, 90% of the time I'm talking about the work that I do with the podcast, building my course, newsletter, etc., working on my businesses, right? And in those moments of deep work, I use Brain FM. If I'm working out, I do strength training 3 times a week. I do that challenge every single day, the 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, and I do ice baths every Tuesday and Thursday. Anytime I'm doing anything physical, I do not listen to Brain FM or anything when I'm doing physical activity. Most of the time, I put on a song where it gets the hair standing up on my arms, or a speech. So for example, Tom Brady gave a speech, I can't remember on what podcast, every single time to get my head in the right place right before I go into the ice bath for 8 minutes and 46 seconds prior to that. That's exactly the speech that I'm listening to, is Tom Brady talking about how he got to where he got and talking about discipline. So I think it's completely predicated on the person and the type of deep work you're trying to get into. If you're dedicating a lot of mental energy into something, music is not going to be a good choice for you. But if you're trying to dedicate physical energy, exerting physical energy, at least what I have found, then music or some sort of motivational speech can be really great. I'll give you a hyper example. I found a video of this guy talking, and I feel like everybody's using it now in the background of their songs or their videos, where this guy's talking about how you're going soft. What happened to that energy that you were dedicating before? What happened to that drive that you originally wanted at the beginning? And there is just, it's like a 15 seconds, but I just put it on a loop. It continually reminds me why I'm fighting for the things that I'm fighting, irrelevant of my heart rate, irrelevant of maybe how weak I might feel in that moment or exhausted I might feel in that moment. So I think that it's completely predicated on, one, the individual, and two, the type of quote unquote deep work you're trying to get into. Is it physical or is it completely mental? If it's mental for me, it's more Brain FM, musicals, instrumental type stuff, nature sound. If it's physical, it's more a song that I know is going to get me to increase my energy or my focus, or a speech. I used to do this all the time before football and boxing. That was the thing I always did. Music always got me in the zone where I remember people saying like, oh, hey, you didn't hear me script. No, I didn't hear any of that. I was completely focused and present in the moment. The only thing I could hear was like my heartbeat and feeling the sweat rolling down my arms and head, and nothing else mattered at that point. I was just there 100%.
Just living present in the moment. And I've talked to I've talked to a bunch of jiu-jitsu competitors over the years and sort of tried to pick their brain on, how do you get ready for competition? What do you think about, when there's like 2 hours left to go until you step on the mat, 1 hour left? Like what is your where is your mind at? And a lot of them just say like, just live in the moment, just try to feel, take note of how you feel, your breathing, your heart rate, your feet when you're in the warm-up area on the mats, and like envision what your heart will be like when it's pounding through the roof, when you're in the middle of this fight, what your fingertips are going to feel like when you're grabbing, the other person's kimono, what it'll feel like when you're just breathing fire through your throat because your lungs are so gassed. Like try to envision those feelings and try not to give extra energy or give extra unnecessary effort towards like a warm up or hyping yourself up, because that's really energy that could be directed towards the actual activity itself. So there's different, and then I see guys who do like crazy warm ups where they get really, like 100 burpees, and I'm like, man, that just seems like I understand wanting to get your heart rate up, but at the same time, that is. I don't know if I could say wasted energy, but it's energy that I would rather allocate, I think, to the actual event itself. So when we talk about tapping into flow state, how do you think, for an athlete who's about to perform on a big event, maybe it's a hockey game or a jiu-jitsu event or whatever, what do you think is it possible for them to enter flow state in such a stressful situation? Is that a possibility? And if so, how can we harness that?
So I have not been in that position. However, from the high stress situations that I have been in, to me, I think it's a lot about visualization techniques. So, and to your point, feeling connected. So I'll get to the visualization in a second, but let's talk about feeling connected, because you said something early that sparked this. I literally told my wife last night, I don't think I'll ever go back to working out in shoes. She's like, what the hell? what are you talking about? And I was like, when I first started getting back into working out and strength training, I just, for whatever reason, in our basement area, finished basement with workout area, I stopped wearing shoes. It's just like, well, why? And I was like, I wanted to be focused on what my body was telling me, because I think as a species now, we have gotten away from actually listening to our body and feeling actually connected with our body. And so I questioned, could there be power found in finding more ways to ground myself or listen to what my body needed in the moment, focusing on form, right? And just focusing on being there, not being distracted by everything else. And so not having shoes on, as ridiculous as that might sound, and I knew in jiu-jitsu, this is, everybody's listening probably like, dude, we do this all the time. That was new for me, right? That was an interesting, different dynamic for me when it came to working out. Now, second, going back to visualization technique, the closest I could maybe relate to that question that you had just asked about getting into a flow state when you're about to take this massively stressful situation. I think for me, when it came to when I was doing boxing and football too, was I just visualized the hell out of what I was going to be doing to my opponent or to that team. So I'll give you an example. I made varsity freshman year of high school, never happened. And one of the things that I connected to my success there with football was that when I was on the sideline and I had headphones in before the game or in the locker room, I was visualizing running and dropping as low as I could and running through someone. And it was all about the form or the feeling that I would get, almost like this drug being shoved into my vein. And the more that I pictured me doing those things or catching an opponent off guard while boxing because they dropped their because they were getting tired, just visualizing that moment made me extremely friggin' hungry to get into the position to enjoy running through someone or catching my opponent off guard, because I made this story in my head of this thing unfolding, and now I wanted to bring it to life. And once I got addicted to the visual of that process, then I wanted it really bad when I got into the ring or when I got onto the field. And so that was one exercise that I would do when it came to physical things, when it came to opponents, whether it be a team or whether it be a single individual. And that, therefore, to your point, took away the energy thinking about how big the crowd was, how many people were watching me, what if I mess up, what if my form's off, what will people think? It didn't leave any more space in my head to think about those other things, which then in turn allowed me to just think about how I was going to perform in the moment when I actually took the field or when I stepped into the ring.
Would you say that you entered flow state when you played football?
Yes. 100%. And I was pretty young too at that point. I would say most of the time I was entering into flow state. Yes. And it was because I got into a really good routine. I've always been a very analytical individual. And what I mean by that is focusing on, if I do something, I'm doing it for a reason. I'm very intentional about why I'm doing things. So even in high school and partially college too, when it came to sports, I was always tinkering around with different things, right? Even from like reading before I would perform, didn't work. I thought maybe if I, read a motivational speech, maybe that would help to get me pumped up, or reading quotes. Didn't help. Then it came down to music. Music got me there, still does get me there. It was speeches, right? I'm always trying different things, but in high school with football, I definitely got into a flow state. There were so many times, whether it be a family or friend saying, "Did you hear us?" And it was completely silent. It was like in a movie when a grenade goes off and there's like this high ringing noise in your ear. That's kind of what I heard. It wasn't a ring, but it was my heartbeat. It was sweat trickling. It was even my shoulder pads crackling or adjusting as I squatted down, right? It was all these kind of different things that I was super in tune to.
Is it possible for somebody who is maybe a novice in terms of whatever skill they're doing to enter flow state. So like in jiu-jitsu, I guess that equivalent would be somebody who has a white belt, right? Like somebody who is, I don't know, a couple of months into training and they're in the gym. And this, keep in mind, this is somebody who's not very knowledgeable in grappling. You might even call them a beginner, but they know some moves. They know kind of what the goal is. They know where the dangers are, and you know they have a little bit of game. Can that person enter flow state, or do you have to be like of a certain skill level to be able to tap into that?
I don't necessarily think that you have to be of a certain skill. However, I think that you need a lot of reps, like anything else, right? And I think a lot of our mental state is similar to that of a muscle. The more practice that you get, the better you're going to get with it. And the less that you practice it, the greater chance that it's going to atrophy. So I think the question or analogy that I would paint is basically what you asked in a way is like, if someone just started at the gym, are they going to be able to, grab 75 pounds in each hand and jump on an incline bench? No, probably not. Will they be able to lift 5, 10, 20 pounds to start? Yeah, probably, right? And will they work their way up to 75 pounds and then 100 and so on and so forth? Sure. And I think that flow state is the same exact way, right? It took me a lot of practice to get to where I am today, but that was between environmental design, that was between using specific tools like timer, gamifying things, but it didn't mean I was a professional. It just meant that I had more reps to adapt to my situations. And so I think even a novice coming in, even though I'm not super familiar with jiu-jitsu, I would assume that the basics still remain the same, that he or she could get into flow state as long as they took more time to utilize some of those tools and tactics, whether it be visualization, right? Whether it be leveraging certain types of music. But I don't see why it wouldn't be possible. I don't think it would happen right out of the gate because, again, you need reps to build up the muscle. And I think flow state is like that too as well. If you've never gotten into flow state, it's really hard to get into flow state. But the more that you practice getting into flow state, it does get somewhat, and I use this word a little lightly, it does get easier, right? If you're thoughtful about your energy, your distractions, your environment, and the things that get you locked in. And once you pinpoint those things, which is the premise of life, right? We do something, it works, we double down. We don't, we switch gears. Getting into flow state is no different than that. I know I am easily distracted. Therefore, I'm going to remove as many distractions as possible. I know that I will get motivated when I visualize what I'm going to be doing. Therefore, I am going to imagine those things and dedicate energy and exerting mental energy to that visualization. That, for me, was just through years of practice.
In jiu-jitsu, flowing is more of a type of training. It's more about like sparring without the goal of necessarily winning. Whereas a big criticism of white belts is that they don't know how to use their strength, so they're constantly tense, which is actually really annoying for someone who's like more skilled, because someone who's more skilled realizes how to allocate muscle tension. Like there's times to be tense and there's times to be relaxed. And a lot of the time when you're rolling with a white belt, they're constantly tense. And the result is they're easy to move. They're easy to predict. They get tired quicker because they're constantly straining. And that becomes something that you learn over time in jiu-jitsu. So I don't know what it would look like if we would have two people of equal skill trying to flow with each other. Maybe if we set the clear parameter that the goal is not to win, but just to keep moving and just to keep like giving and taking, maybe then we could see flow rolling, as it's called. But like if you had somebody who's like really high level and somebody who's low level, I think that there could be flowing going on from one athlete. I think it would be difficult for the other athlete. It would also depend is the black belt, for example, is the black belt like trying to smash the white belt? Because that's not going to be a flow state at all. But if they're both giving and taking, and the black belt is recognizing the white belt being tense when they shouldn't and sort of like giving and taking, then I think maybe there could be like a synergy of sorts where there could be an entrance into flow state. But I think the best flow state that I've experienced is when it's two high level athletes and they're again giving and taking and moving around. So I'm trying to figure out like at what skill level, what is the prerequisite base skill level of somebody to actually experience flow state. And I'm not sure that there's an answer at all. I don't know if you need to put in a certain amount of time or be at a certain skill level or have a certain amount of knowledge in something to actually be able to tap into that flow state.
Well, I'm not sure either. However, I would say this goes back to my point around the Goldilocks rule, right? Part of getting into the flow state is focusing on the Goldilocks rule, which is if you're competing with someone who's massively above your level, you're most likely not going to get into the flow state because you're going to feel defeated and you're going to be retracted. And then what's going to happen is your mental energy is going to go towards the defeat and the detraction, like, why did I do this? How come I'm not good enough, et cetera, which means that you're not focusing on your form. Right. And so that's why it's very important if you're trying to level up your game to compete with someone that is actually on your level. And that's not an easy out. It's challenging yourself to get really good at one thing by repeating it 10,000 times. And that has been the premise of my life and my professional life, is just getting really good and hyper focused on one thing and repeating it over and over and over and over again. And that's what I think makes someone physically dangerous and ultimately mentally dangerous. It has taken me, as minor as it might seem, when it comes to that challenge that I said for 100 days, every single rep, every single day has allowed me to get a little better, whether it be time, whether it be form, whether it be my heart rate, controlling my heart rate. But that has taken repetition after repetition after repetition. And I think so many things in our lives are the same way. Just getting really good at the basics, just like Kobe said before, right? I got really good at the basics, and that's why I became really good. I think we try to overcomplicate so many things in our lives, but I think that's why a lot of value can be found in aligning yourself with someone that isn't drastically above you, but somewhat on the same level as you in your abilities, physically or mentally.
Is there a way to set triggers for a flow state? Like, I think it's important for athletes to develop some kind of a routine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're getting ready for a competition of some sort, that there's a consistency to it, that there, what if maybe it's a warm up, maybe it's breathing exercises. You had mentioned visualization, things like that.
Yeah.
Is there a way to set triggers to get into the flow state, or at least to set an environment so that when you are about to engage in that said activity, even if it's in an unfamiliar area, that you have triggers to be able to get into the zone?
Mm-hmm. I think triggers and tools are kind of what we were talking about earlier, is something that can start the clock for you, physically and metaphorically. So when you're asking about triggers, when I sit down to get into flow state or get into deep work, if you will, when I set the timer for 52 minutes, that is the trigger, right? That is the thing for my brain to say, okay, now it's time to focus. And every second that you dedicate to thinking about other things, you're shaving down the clock. And that means that you're less productive, or you're not focusing on the thing that you said you're going to focus on, and there's a reason behind it. So again, I think super simple triggers. We all have our cell phones on us constantly. A lot of us have some sort of like Garmin or watch that has a timer on it. That for me is a trigger to get into flow state. And I do that physically too as well, whether it be stepping into an ice bath, whether it be strength training. Everything I do is timed. I actually did an experiment for 30 days where I timed everything in my life, from taking a shower to on the toilet, brushing my teeth to working, all of it. And a big aspect of it was to not only gamify, but it was also to create triggers to understand how much time I was spending. Now, it was a ridiculous experiment because I was timing every single thing, but it allowed me to realize, holy shit, can't believe I'm wasting this much time on that thing. Now, I don't do it anymore. It was just a 30-day experiment, but in the moment, something that I experienced with that experiment over 30 days was the trigger. Setting the timer was the trigger. The clock starts now. And every second that you delay, you're wasting your most valuable asset, and that's your time, which means that you're giving yourself less of a chance. And to me, I didn't want that. I don't want that. And so that really sparked the motivation and the focus.
Is it possible to reach flow state while being stressed or panicked?
So a lot of us are stressed, right? I think that in order to reach flow state, you have to not be thinking about the stress or the panic, right? This is where I think exercises like box breathing can come in handy, or controlling your breathing, because you're just focused on one thing. And this goes back to the beginning of our conversation where we said your mind cannot focus on multiple things. It can only focus on one thing. So if you're thinking about stress or you're thinking about panic, then sure, you will not get into flow state. If you are thinking about controlling your breathing and timing, holding in your breath and exhaling and timing that, then you're not thinking about the stress or the high level environment that you're in. So I think it's about where you want to point the binoculars of your attention, right? And so therefore it becomes, what can I do to distract myself from the stresses of life? For me, sometimes it can be as simple as breathing. Sometimes it can be as simple as looking down at my watch and saying, can I get my heart rate lower? Great. I'm going to focus on controlling my breathing. Then I'm not going to be worried about all of these other things. So I think that, yes, it's possible to get in flow state if you're stressed, but you need to not think about being stressed in order to get into flow state. We're all stressed at the end of the day to some sort of capacity, but it's, are you thinking about being stressed? Then you're not going to be able to get into flow state.
Amazing. Scott, what is your favorite thing to do?
That's a really good question. I really enjoy what I do with a podcast. Research is a lot of fun. Looking up different studies, it blows my mind what the human brain is capable of. And so researching, kind of nerdy, but I friggin' love it. I think there's so much fun in knowledge and challenging myself. Man, I always want to do something that just makes me feel a little uncomfortable every single day. So, whether it's, I know ice baths have now become a ridiculous thing where everybody and their mother's doing it. But when it's 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside and you're jumping in an ice bath that's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it takes a lot of mental strength and fortitude and focus and discipline to do that. And so I think it's just challenging myself every day is another thing that I love to do for fun, whether it be physically or mentally. So I stepped up a podcast, doing 1 episode to 2 episodes a week. That is a lot of freaking work. To doing an ice bath and trying to get to 1 minute, to 2 minutes, to 3 minutes, to 8 minutes, right? To doing this challenge of 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups for 100 days, to timing my life. I love experimenting, man. We're on this planet to literally see where our edge is and can we push past our edge. And so for me, I'm always questioning, to what mental capacity is my edge? Can I push past it? To what physical capacity is my edge? Can I push past it? And then I try little experiments to see where those things are. And I push the boundaries or the border of my world a little further every day. And it's so friggin' rewarding and fun and just, it's cool. It's a lot of fun.
So you go in the ice bath for 8 minutes?
Yes. So I take pictures of this and I've logged it. I have an Excel spreadsheet that I put up publicly where I have the temperature, the outside temperature, the temperature of the ice bath, and the time in the ice bath too as well. And so I have a running Excel spreadsheet. So anytime I do it on Tuesday or Thursday, I post the Google Doc online so I can hold myself accountable to doing it.
What's something people might not know about you?
I get addicted to these things. So I have been sober for 2.5 years now, and I always look for outlets to get addicted to. So ice baths became an addiction. Doing this challenge with push-ups and sit-ups for 100 days became an addiction. Strength training, eating clean. When I get into something, I go all in. I go all in and I get addicted to that thing. And it's so rewarding, just the addictive aspect. So I think addiction gets a really bad rap in society. But I think if you can get hyper focused and addicted to really healthy things, it can be transformative to your life. So I have a very addictive personality, and I direct that addiction to healthy things in my life.
So again, perhaps taking something that could easily be negative, but redirecting it for the positive and leveraging it to build positive things in life. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your biggest fear?
Probably losing my family. It's not something I think about very often, but our daughter is only a year and 3 months. She's the most amazing thing that happened to our family. And
Mhm.
I don't know what I would do if anything ever happened to her. Their pregnancy was super challenging for my wife, and it put me and her in a position that we've never been in before. My wife lost a ton of blood, and almost had a transfusion, and it was crazy. And in that moment, I had to choose between spending time with my daughter that just came out in the surgery room and my wife on the table that they were trying to stop the breathing. And that feeling, or that moment where I had to choose, man, I can't even explain it. It was a horrific experience. I would not want to go through that again. And so that's something that I definitely fear, is losing them, or something just absolutely horrific happening to either of them.
Had I known that you were a father, I think I would have known the answer to that question before I asked it. Um, Thinking about the mental part of things in that situation that you just described, how did you stay calm?
So it's funny. A couple of weeks later, my wife was like, "You were so calm in there." I was like, "No, I was dying inside." And the only way that I was actually, quote unquote, looking calm was because I focused on the reality that it wasn't about me in that moment. And if I were to show any signs of stress or weakness, the significant impact it would have on my wife and her ability to just focus on being patient and surviving, it would have disrupted that. And so it kind of came back to visualization, where I was like, if I panic, this is what it will cause, which could ultimately lead to this horrible bad place. I do not want to do that. So therefore, I need to muster up the courage and realize this isn't about me, and I'm not the one bleeding out right now, and step it the fuck up. And externally, that's what it looked like. Inside, it looked like a bunch of people running around, and there was a building on fire, and nobody knew what they were doing.
Interesting how portraying, you're inside your mind, it's a shit show, and you are portraying this image of calmness and control so that your wife could get comfort and feel that. But do you feel that just by exuding that energy, you could also internalize that energy and feed off your own energy? Like there's I think the best grapplers in the world, there's a guy who is an absolute legend. He's retired from competition now. His name's Marcelo Garcia. He's considered one of the greatest of all time in jiu-jitsu. And he's somebody that I modeled my game off of a lot. And one thing he would always do is he would keep his face incredibly calm. Even when he was in really bad situations, his facial expression would always be calm. And I have people who would come up to me, because I've competed for a long time, and they're like, "Matt, whenever you compete, your face is always so calm. Why do you do that?" And I'm like, it's because Marcelo said that having a calm face allows him to internalize that feeling, and it kind of has like a ripple effect. So it's almost like a
Yeah.
self-fulfilled it's like a self-fulfilled type of energy. Do you believe that
Yeah.
that has true effects?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a completely new situation for me. So that was the last thing on my mind. I was just focused on all the external purpose because, again, I don't think I've ever been through anything that could even remotely compare to going through something like that. It's hard to even explain to someone that isn't a parent, right? A lot of things about parenting, let alone a traumatic birthing experience like that. But I do absolutely think that there is a world where your external physical attributes and having them calm and collect can reflect in internally too as well, right? I remember, and this will seem like a somewhat crazy example, but I've brought on some massive guests like Chris Voss, right? The top FBI terrorist negotiator in the world. And I was super intimidated hopping on the phone with this dude, on camera with this guy. And from the outside, I looked completely calm. And eventually I did get internally calm too as well. But I did some breathing exercise. I got in the game and I realized that, okay, you've done this a million times. And I think it's really about just telling ourselves that, you've got this. This is no different, right? You've gotten these reps before. You can do this. I love to, my wife will joke about this, but when I'm doing something really hard, I talk to myself as if I'm like a motivational speaker on stage. And I'm actually going to try this experiment where I record myself talking to myself. And that's what I'm going to listen to when I actually get into a really challenging position. And I want to see if the effects of that are greater than listening to someone else's motivational speech or music and physical exertion.
Mm-hmm. What is the number one thing that individuals in society can do to improve mental health? Just low hanging fruit. What can we do?
Ooh, love
What
this.
can
Love
anyone
this.
do to improve their mental health today?
So, number one thing, talk about it. Man, I think that the reason why, a core reason as to why mental health has got to where it is because we bury down our traumas and the things that we've been through. And therefore, because we do that, we think that we are quote unquote not normal because we've experienced things that other people have not experienced. Therefore, if we actually as a society talked more about these things and we were actually vulnerable about these things, we would realize, oh, wow, a majority of society has also gone through that thing. And then we give other individuals permission to talk about those things. So I've taken that into action with my podcast where I talk about when my parents got a divorce when I was super young and how that affected me as a kid and the empty promises of my father. And I talk about those things because I want other people to maybe not so much feel comfortable about it, but at least be willing to talk about it, that it is normal. We all have stressors. We all have some sort of anxiety. We're all fighting some sort of battle. And the more that we vocalize it to other people, the more that we lean into it and accept it and figure out a way on how to leverage that in our life.
Last question. Scott Lynch, what is the purpose? What is the point of life? Why are we here?
The $1 trillion question. You're gonna maybe not enjoy this answer. I don't think there is a purpose for why we're here. Now, that can either feel dark and unfulfilling and sad, or it can be very powerful because it gives you an opportunity to prove me wrong. And that can be some great motivation.
Powerful stuff. Wow. Great conversation. Man, that was honestly, it felt like I blinked and it was over. It was like we're in some kind of flow state or something. Before we go, is there anything that maybe we didn't talk about? Anything that we could have maybe elaborated on in flow state in any capacity? Maybe I missed a question or something. Anything you'd like to add to our conversation?
Not entirely. I think what's important that maybe we didn't touch upon, I can cover here in a quick second, is that the idea should not be to strive for flow state, because that's going to pull you probably further away from flow state. So it's kind of an ironic dichotomy, if you will. I think it's just focusing on being present and focusing on what you're getting into and why you're getting into it. Don't focus on this end goal, like we were talking about at the beginning, early on, about getting in the end zone, the reward, right? Focus on just being present, listening to yourself, removing distractions, being there, and being in tune with your body. Don't focus on, I need to get into a flow state, because then you're going to feel pretty defeated if you don't get into a flow state, which means that you'll have less chance of getting into a flow state in the future.
To reach a flow state is something that someone could do. Like for me, I would think that, if someone was like, hey, Matt, as my coach, how do you think I can enter flow state? Would a good answer, obviously this won't get you into flow state alone, but just becoming as skilled as possible in that activity and as knowledgeable as possible, will that directly affect somebody's ability to get into flow state?
1,000%. So I can't tell you how many, I know exactly how much time it takes me to write a podcast episode, right? It varies a little bit. It's from 3.5 hours to about 4.5. So there's an hour variation between it. The way that I have gotten into flow state is by writing hundreds and hundreds of episodes. I've written 417 episodes so far. That is so much goddamn repetition, right? But every single time that I write a podcast, I get into flow state. I know. And I've built an environment where I already have the script laid out. I already have some points to create some inertia with creativity. So I make sure to sand down any of these bumps in order for me to slide through each of those things. And the only way that I've got there is by continuing and getting those reps in every single time and just repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. And I think that's what makes a very dangerous physical person and mental person, is just repetition. And we talked about Kobe earlier really quick, right? He got really good at the basics and he became one of the basketball players in history, hands down. And I think it's the same thing for any of us in our lives. Repetition is a really great way to smooth down the surfaces so you're not getting snagged on any of those bumps.
And when you say repetition, it's a hot topic to debate in jiu-jitsu right now, like drilling repetition for repetition. So, again, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the sport, but one of the main goals is to, when you're on top, go past your partner's legs and get access to their torso. And from there, you can have chances to, in a fight, you could strike, you could do submissions. So it's advantageous to get past our partner's legs. Okay. We call it passing their guard. So there is a debate about repetition. Should we drill grabbing our partner's legs 1, 2, 3, 4 with no resistance, or should we increase resistance to a small degree so that every time I try and do my repetition, there's a slight resistance and an obstacle in my way and a genuine reaction. So there's repetition, drilling for reps. And then there's repetition drilling for reactions, reconnaissance, learning what my opponent's common reactions are going to be, and basically drilling against variables. And that is something that is commonly, we refer to it as repetition without repetition. So it's like doing the same task, but you're not performing it the same every time. When you say repetition, do you think that what would be more advantageous? Just purely getting reps in something, or getting reps when there's different variables thrown at you?
I think it's completely predicated on the situation, right? Like when it comes to jiu-jitsu, it sounds like that getting more reps in with different variables can be certainly advantageous. For me, when it comes to, I guess it all depends on your goal at the end of the day. Okay. Right. So for me, most of my time, it's about efficiency. So it's about my MPGs. So if it's about my MPGs, then it's purely about repetitions and not so much different looks in the environment and challenges within my environment, right? So what I mean by that is I'm removing as much in my environment to focus and get the rep that I need and the end goal to be efficient. So I want to write a podcast as quickly as I can with it packing the most value behind it. So without there being a detraction of value. And so therefore, I don't want any variables in my way, looks into your example, to overcomplicate that intention. But I think that if you're trying to up your skill, there is absolutely, if that's your goal, then it probably is about reps with varied degrees of stressors or looks. So I think the word that always comes to mind that's important, that's in my vocabulary and should be embedded in everybody else is intention. What is the end goal? If you're purely going for efficiency and energy conservation, then it's smooth surfaces. It's removing as much variables as possible. If you're going for skill growth, then it's probably less about the smoothness and more about varying variables so that you can up your skills. But I think they're somewhat related. But I think it's about focusing on what's the end goal, right? Questioning what's the intention here, I think is really important, because then that sets the behavior going into it rather than going into it blindly for just the sake of getting reps.
Fantastic stuff. Scott Lynch, I'm not going to steal more of your time. Can you let us know where people can reach you and any social media links or products you'd like to talk about?
Sure. So go to scottmlynch.com. You can find my podcast there, newsletter, course, coaching, the whole 9 yards. You can follow me on social media at Motivated Scott. And as far as products, no, I just want to impact people's lives, man. So, if you end up going into one of those things, great. But I think at the end of the day, I hope you found value in the conversation. In this conversation, I hope someone finds value in the podcast and what I'm preaching. And hopefully, most importantly, that it's not just about collection of information. It's about leveraging that newfound knowledge in your life to become a better person.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Scott. It was a great conversation. I learned a ton. Guys, thank you for joining us. If you want to support the show, check out the links in the bottom. I appreciate everything. Please leave us a review or subscribe, like, share, comment wherever you can. And definitely, guys, check out the Motivated Mind podcast. It is awesome. I'm a big fan of it. And Scott Lynch, thank you so much for joining us today, buddy.
Appreciate you having me on. Thanks, Matt.
All right. The Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. Take care, guys. Bye.